My ex-wife called me a financial liability in open court, in front of a judge, her attorney, and 12 people waiting for their own divorces in the gallery behind us. 11 days later, I was standing in 6 inches of mud on 40 acres of land in rural Montana that my father had left me, reading a handwritten letter that told me those 40 acres sat on top of something worth $83 million. But I need to back up, because the 11 days between the courtroom and the mud matter, every single one of them. My name is Garrett Foley. In the spring of this year, I was 42 years old. I worked as a structural engineering technician at a mid-sized civil firm in Columbus, Ohio. 9 years at the same desk, produced precise technical work that other people stamped with their license numbers and received credit for. I was not a licensed structural engineer. I had passed 2 of the 4 parts of the professional engineering exam and failed the other 2, once at 31 and once at 34. After the second failure, my father called me from his house in Dayton and said, "Garrett, maybe the license isn't the point, maybe the work is the point." I didn't know if that was comfort or resignation. My father was not a man who distinguished between the two. His name was Douglas Foley. He had built a small chain of family restaurants, Foley's Kitchen, 4 locations across southwestern Ohio. Nothing remarkable, and nothing he ever pretended was remarkable. Reliable breakfast spots, the kind that fill up on Sunday mornings and clear out by 2 in the afternoon. He'd started with 1 location in 1989, a $40,000 loan and his wife's cooking recipes. By the time he retired in 2019, he had 4 locations, a commercial property he owned outright, and a reputation in Dayton as a man who was generous with portions and strict about hours. My sister, Nadine, is 5 years older than me. She joined the restaurants at 24, worked the floor, worked the books, became the operating manager by 30, and by the time our father retired, she was running all 4 locations without his signature on anything. My father's preference was not subtle, but it wasn't cruel the way some preferences are. It was simply a fact of how the family was organized, the way furniture is arranged in a room. Some pieces face the door, some pieces face the wall. I faced the wall. I was good at my job anyway. My firm's senior engineers requested me by name because my load calculations were clean and my documentation never came back from the contractor marked up. I was not resentful about this. Resentment requires the belief that something was taken from you, and I had never quite believed I was owed more than what I had. My wife, Leanne Foley, she kept the name through the separation and dropped it the week the papers were filed, had married me at 31 and spent the next 8 years arriving at a conclusion about who I was. The conclusion was not flattering. She made more money than I did, and this had been fine until it wasn't fine, and once it wasn't fine, it became the explanation for everything. The divorce was filed in January. By March, it was in front of a judge. I will tell you what her attorney said in that courtroom because it is the kind of thing you remember with a precision that surprises you. A compact woman in a gray suit. She said, "Your Honor, Mr. Foley's earning trajectory over the past 9 years demonstrates a consistent pattern of professional stagnation. He has twice failed to obtain licensure that would meaningfully increase his income. He contributes to the household at a level substantially below his spouse. The petitioner asks the court to consider this pattern in the division of marital assets, as my client made the majority of financial decisions in this marriage out of necessity." Professional stagnation. I wrote those 2 words on the notepad in front of me because I did not know what else to do with my hands. The judge was not impressed by the argument, as it turned out, and the asset division was fair. But fair is not the same as painless, and the room full of strangers who had heard me described as a financial liability were still there when the session ended. I walked out past them. A man near the back row caught my eye, I don't know why. He looked away. My father had passed the previous August, a cardiac event at 68, on a Tuesday morning in his kitchen in Dayton. My mother, Ruth, had gone 4 years before that from pancreatic cancer, and losing them both meant the estate had been sitting in trust while I was trying to keep my marriage together and then trying to end it without losing my apartment. I hadn't had the bandwidth to think carefully about what my father had or hadn't left me. Nadine handled the estate communications. She handled most things. The will was read in a conference room at an estate attorney's office in downtown Dayton. The attorney's name was Holton, a trim, deliberate man in his 60s who treated the distribution of assets the way a pharmacist fills a prescription, precisely, without drama. Nadine was there with her husband, Brock, who worked in commercial insurance and had the confident handshake of a man who had never doubted his own judgment. I was there alone. Leanne and I had already separated by then. Holton read the distribution clearly. To Nadine, all 4 operating locations of Foley's Kitchen, including equipment, goodwill, and existing lease agreements. The commercial property on Wilmington Pike, owned outright, valued at approximately $410,000. The family home in Kettering, liquid assets totaling $187,000. To me, 40 acres of undeveloped land in Mineral County, Montana, held under a land trust my father had established in 1994. a storage unit key and a handwritten letter to be retrieved from a safe deposit box at a Dayton branch of Fifth Third Bank, and $8,000 for travel expenses. Nadine didn't react visibly. She had known about the restaurant inheritance for years, had structured her whole life around it. The Montana land was a surprise to her. She said afterward she hadn't known it existed. Brock said under his breath, but not quietly enough, "Montana, that's something." I looked at Holton. "Is there a description of the property?" 40 acres in Mineral County. The deed has been transferred to your name. No structure on record, but there is a storage container that was placed as domat in 2003. He paused. Your father's letter specifies that it should be opened on site. Those are his instructions. Okay. The $8,000 is accessible today. Thank you. Nadine pulled me aside on the sidewalk outside. She was not unkind about it, she rarely was. She was practical in the way older siblings become when they have been responsible for a long time. "Garrett, I want you to know that whatever Dad decided, I don't think it reflects on—" "It's fine, Nadine. The Montana land is probably worth something. Land usually is. I'm going to go see it." She looked at me the way she had been looking at me for 42 years. Fond, slightly worried, fundamentally uncertain about what I was going to do with myself. "Let me know what you find," she said. I drove to the bank that afternoon. The safe deposit box contained the storage unit key, a yellow padlock with the combination written on a sticker on its back, and a sealed envelope with my father's handwriting on the front. "Garrett, open at the property." I booked a flight to Missoula for 3 days later. The divorce had just asked a judge to describe me as professionally stagnant. My father had left me 40 acres in a state I had visited once in my life at 17 on a camping trip I remembered mostly for the cold. I had $8,000 for travel expenses, a padlock combination, and a letter I wasn't allowed to open until I was standing on the land itself. I had nothing pulling me in the opposite direction. I flew into Missoula, rented a truck, a practical decision given what Mineral County roads are like in spring, and drove 90 minutes east toward a town called Superior, then another 20 minutes down a county road that turned from pavement to packed gravel to 2 tire tracks through pine scrub. I had the deed coordinates on my phone and a paper map the rental agency had given me without being asked. The land was at the end of those tire tracks. No cabin, no barn, a lower meadow along a seasonal creek, a ridge of ponderosa pine climbing west, and sitting at the edge of the tree line, a 20-foot storage container painted a dark green that had faded to the color of old moss. Around it, nothing. Above it, a sky so clear it looked manufactured. I stood there for a while. The creek made a sound. A hawk worked a thermal somewhere behind me. I walked to the container, used the combination, pulled the door open. Inside, a camp chair still in its carrying bag, a Coleman lantern and a box of fuel canisters, a folded tarp, a small metal lockbox with a post-it in my father's handwriting, same combination as the padlock, and on the floor, neatly stacked in waterproof bins, 3 decades of documentation. Surveys, maps, correspondence, folders sorted by year, all of it organized with the careful precision of someone who had been tending a secret for a very long time. I set up the camp chair outside the container. The afternoon light came in low and gold over the ridge. I opened the envelope. The letter was 3 pages, my father's handwriting, the compressed right-leaning print of a man who had filled order pads for 30 years. "Garrett, if you're reading this, you made the trip. I wasn't sure you would. I left you some room to walk away from it, and the fact that you didn't tells me what I hoped it would. Let me explain what you're sitting on. In 1994, when the restaurants were doing well enough that I had some money to move and not enough that I felt comfortable putting it in the market, a hydrologist named Vernon Speck told me about a parcel in Mineral County, Montana that contained a significant alluvial aquifer, a natural underground water formation fed by snowmelt from the Cabinet Mountains. Vernon was doing federal survey work at the time. He said the aquifer on this parcel was one of the largest undocumented freshwater formations he had identified in private land surveys in the northwestern United States. He said the land itself was worth almost nothing. Remote, undevelopable for housing, no timber value, no mineral extraction on record. He said the water rights attached to it were worth everything. I paid $31,000 for the 40 acres, including the appurtenant water rights. Everybody thought I was throwing money away on rangeland. I let them think it. In those years, commercial water rights in Montana were complicated, contested, and not obviously valuable to most buyers. That has changed. Municipal water systems in 3 counties draw from the same geological formation. 2 bottling operations have been acquiring adjacent water rights for 15 years. A federal environmental assessment completed in 2018, a copy is in the blue bin, identified this aquifer as a Tier 1 freshwater source under the Western States Water Council criteria. What that means in practical terms is that the water rights attached to this parcel are now among the most legally protected and commercially significant private water rights in the state. Vernon had an independent valuation completed in 2021. It is in the blue bin. The water rights are valued at between $78 and $88 million, depending on the structure of any commercial development agreement. The surface land adds approximately $2 million. Total conservative estimate, $80 million. Potentially more, given what's happened to water scarcity since the valuation was done. I need to tell you why I left this to you and not to Nadine. Nadine is exactly what I built her to be. She is a good operator, decisive, efficient, and she will run Foley's Kitchen for another 20 years and do it well. If I had left her these water rights, she would have found a buyer within a year. She would have taken a cash offer, paid the taxes, and invested it in a restaurant expansion. That is not wrong, that is Nadine. But water rights of this kind are not a cash transaction. They are a generational asset. They require patience, legal precision, and the willingness to work slowly with people who understand the system. That is you, Garrett. I know that's not how you see yourself. I know I didn't help you see yourself that way. I spent a lot of years telling you, without saying it plainly, that Nadine was the inheritor and you were the backup. I did that because the restaurants needed continuity, and contested succession would have destroyed what your mother and I built. I used your patience against you to keep the peace. I am not proud of that. I won't tell you I'm proud of you because I didn't say it enough when I was alive, and writing it in a letter feels like a cheat. But I will tell you this. I watched you for 42 years. I watched you fail the PE exam twice and show up the next Monday and keep working. I watched your marriage get hard, and I watched you try to hold it together without asking anyone for help. I watched you spend 9 years doing work that other men signed their names to, and I never once heard you complain about it to me. Not once. Other men would have quit. Other men would have cut corners or made noise or found someone to blame. You just kept working. That's the man I'm trusting with this. Not because I expect you to get rich off it, though you will, but because I know you won't sell it to the first company that calls. I know you'll read everything in those bins before you make a single phone call. I know you'll find Vernon, whose contact information is in the red bin, and you'll listen to him before you decide anything. And I know that whatever you build out of this, you'll build it the right way. Vernon Speck is 71 years old and lives in Superior. He is expecting you. He has been holding on to this on my behalf for 3 years, and he will tell you everything I didn't have room to write here. The red bin has everything you need to start. The water rights documentation, the 2021 valuation, Vernon's contact, and the names of 2 water rights attorneys I've worked with over the years. Don't make any decisions before you talk to Vernon and before you talk to at least one of those attorneys. The water has been here for 1,000 years. It will wait. I love you. I didn't say it enough. I'm sorry for that. Dad. I sat in that camp chair for a long time. The creek was running harder now, afternoon snowmelt off the ridge. I could hear it clearly from where I was sitting, a sound I had been hearing since I arrived and not paying attention to, the way you stop hearing traffic after you've lived in a city long enough. I read the letter twice, then I opened the blue bin and started reading the valuation. I did not cry right away. I was not much of a crier and hadn't been since my mother's funeral, but somewhere around the 4th page of the 2021 hydrological assessment, when I understood the aquifer depth, the recharge rate, the estimated sustainable yield figures that the Western States Water Council had flagged as exceptional, I understood what my father had done. He had spent 27 years maintaining a secret, paying property taxes on 40 acres in Montana he had visited maybe a dozen times, keeping it alive and intact and legally clean because he had decided at some point that this was what he wanted to give me. Not because he thought I would get rich, because he thought I would do it right. I stayed that night. I had the tarp, the lantern, a sleeping bag I'd bought from the rental agencies Lost and Found for $15. I slept on the floor of the storage container with the bins around me and the door cracked for air, and I woke to a morning so cold and clear that my breath made shapes I could watch dissolve. That morning I drove into Superior and found Vernon Speck. He was a lean man with a gray beard and the particular stillness of people who spend their lives measuring things they can't see. He lived in a small house near the edge of town with a detached workshop that smelled like paper and mineral samples. He made me coffee, sat me down at a table covered in topographic maps, and spent 4 hours confirming everything in my father's letter and adding to it. The 2021 numbers are conservative, he said. Deliberately so. Your father didn't want a figure that would attract attention before you were ready. The realistic current value, given the bottling industry demand and the municipal contracts that have been structured around that formation, is closer to 83 to 90 million before any development partnership is negotiated. He paused. I've had 2 calls in the last 18 months from companies looking to identify who holds the water rights on that parcel. I didn't tell them anything. Your father's instructions were clear. Why did he trust you with this for 3 years? I asked. Vernon looked at me over his coffee cup. He had the eyes of a man who had spent 50 years watching other men make hasty decisions about things they didn't fully understand, because he called me every April for 27 years to ask how the aquifer was holding up, every single April, same week, no matter what was going on in his life. A man who calls me every April for 27 years about something he hasn't touched, that's a man who's serious. And a man who's serious about protecting something for that long deserves to have someone serious protecting it with him. I flew back to Ohio on a Tuesday. I did not call Nadine. I did not tell my attorney. I took 3 weeks of personal leave from work, which my supervisor approved with the particular gentleness reserved for employees who have been through a divorce and a parental death in the same calendar year. I spent those 3 weeks reading, every document in every bin, the water rights chain of title going back to 1994, the state filing history, the federal environmental designations, the full 2021 valuation and its methodology. Then I called the first of the 2 water rights attorneys my father had listed, the one in Missoula. Her name was Mara Hendricks. She had been practicing water law in Montana for 14 years, and she spoke about water rights the way my senior engineers spoke about load calculations, precisely without hedging, with a clear understanding of where the tolerances were. I liked her immediately. She asked good questions. When I gave her the parcel description, there was a pause on the line. "I know that aquifer," she said. "My father's hydrologist said you would." "Who was your father's hydrologist?" "Vernon Speck." Another pause. "Vernon is the best field hydrologist who ever worked federal surveys in this state. If he told your father this was exceptional, your father was right to listen." She paused again. "Mr. Foley, have you spoken to anyone else about this?" "No." "Good. Keep it that way until we've had a full meeting. There are 3 companies that have been circling that formation for the last decade. If any of them know you've inherited the rights, your phone will ring before the week is out." It rang anyway, probably the deed transfer, public record. 10 days after I returned from Montana, 2 calls came in from numbers I didn't recognize, area codes I didn't know. I didn't answer either. I sent both numbers to Mara. She called me back within the hour. One of those is a water acquisition firm out of Phoenix. The other is a subsidiary of a bottling conglomerate. They already know. A pause. This actually helps us. It confirms the demand. When we go to structure a development agreement, we're not looking for the market. The market is looking for us. Over the following months, Mara and I built what she called a water rights development partnership, a legal framework in which I retained full ownership of the land and the water rights while a commercial partner funded the permitting, infrastructure, and extraction process in exchange for a defined revenue share over a 25-year term. This was not a sale, it was a partnership, the kind of thing my father had been waiting for someone patient enough to build. The best offer came from a municipal water authority in western Montana working with a state conservation trust that needed a long-term freshwater supply agreement to serve 3 growing counties. It was not the highest dollar figure on the table. It was the most legally durable, the most environmentally sound, and the only offer that included a conservation easement protecting the surface land from development in perpetuity. My father would have chosen it without hesitation. I signed the partnership agreement in September. The total value, upfront land and rights valuation plus projected revenue distributions over the partnership term, came to $83 million. Mara called it conservative. Vernon, when I told him, said, "Your father would think that's just about right." I did not tell Nadine. Not because I wanted to punish her. Nadine had never been cruel to me. She had simply occupied the space that was built for her and left me to occupy what remained of mine. That wasn't cruelty, it was just how the family was arranged. But telling Nadine meant Brock knowing, and Brock knowing meant opinions, and opinions meant pressure to simplify, to convert a 25-year partnership into a cleaner cash figure that someone could explain at a dinner table. I didn't need someone to explain it at a dinner table. I needed time to let it work. Christmas came. Nadine hosted at the house in Kettering, her house now. The same table where my father had told me at 34 that maybe the license wasn't the point. Same chairs, Brock's handshake, Nadine's careful, fond worry. During dessert, Brock said, "Garrett, what's the status on the Montana land? You ever going to do something with it, or just let it sit?" I looked at my brother-in-law, the man who had said Montana, that's something in a conference room 9 months ago, in the tone a person uses when they mean the opposite. "I'm working with some partners on a development structure," I said. "Development? Like housing?" "Water rights." He nodded slowly, the way people nod when they don't want to admit they don't know what you're talking about. "That's a niche market." "It is." Nadine watched me through dinner with a different quality of attention than I was used to. Something had shifted in how she looked at me over the past few months. Whether she knew anything or was only picking up on a change she couldn't name, I couldn't tell. "Are you doing okay, Garrett? Like, actually okay?" "I'm good, Nadine, actually good." She accepted that. She had never pushed when I said I was fine, and I had never pushed when she was busy. That was the treaty we'd maintained our whole lives. It was not a bad treaty. It had simply been written at a time when one of us had more to protect than the other. Leanne's engagement announcement came through a mutual friend who texted me a screenshot of the Instagram post without asking if I wanted to see it. A man named Todd, a portfolio manager, ring the size of a regret, caption reading he saw me. I looked at the screenshot for about 20 seconds. Then I put my phone face down on the kitchen counter and went back to the water rights filing I'd been reviewing. Leanne had made a valuation in a courtroom, and it had been based on accurate information. I was at that point professionally stagnant. I had failed the PE exam twice. I made $71,000 a year. Her attorney had read those facts into the record, and they were facts. They just weren't all the facts. The ones that were missing had been sitting in a storage container in Mineral County, Montana, waiting to be opened by someone patient enough to make the trip. I don't believe in karma. I don't expect Leanne to have her moment of reckoning. I don't expect Brock to call me next Christmas and have to eat his words over pie. People who underestimate you don't always find out they were wrong. The world doesn't reliably deliver that scene. But here is what I know. The partnership agreement is finalized. The permitting process is underway. The first revenue distributions are projected to begin in late 2026, at which point my personal share will begin arriving in a holding company my father would have recognized, patient, quiet, organized, tending something for longer than anyone expected it to be tended. I still live in the same apartment in Columbus. I renewed the lease. I still drive the same Subaru. I went back to work at the civil firm after my leave ended, and my senior engineers still request me by name, and my documentation still comes back clean. I have not told a single person in that office what I found in Montana. Mara and I have dinner occasionally when I'm in Missoula for site visits. She is a careful person who asks careful questions, and she was one of the first people in years to ask about my engineering work, the actual daily work, with genuine curiosity rather than the polite performance of it. I don't know what that becomes. I'm not rushing it. My father said the water would wait. I'm taking his advice further than he intended. Last month, I flew back to Mineral County for the seasonal monitoring visit. Vernon met me at the property. He walked the creek line with me, showed me the survey stakes his team had placed, explained the aquifer recharge data from the winter readings. He is 72 now and moves more carefully on uneven ground, but he still reads a topographic map the way a pianist reads sheet music, immediately, completely, without having to think about it. Your father would have liked this part, he said, standing at the edge of the meadow where the creek widens. Which part? The part where it's working, where it's actually becoming what he thought it could be. I stood there with the mountain behind me and the water running through the meadow below, and I thought about my father calling Vernon every April for 27 years, the same week every year, never telling anyone in the family, paying property taxes on 40 acres in Montana that nobody knew existed, waiting for a son who read everything before he acted, who worked slowly, who had spent 9 years learning precision without ever knowing what he was being prepared for. He didn't get to see this part. That's the thing about these letters, the men who write them never do. But he built it so I could, and I am here, and it is working. If someone told you, in open court, with strangers listening, that you were stagnant, that your trajectory demonstrated nothing worth noting, that you had fallen short of every reasonable benchmark a person could measure, I want to ask you something. Did they have all the information? Because the thing about being underestimated is that it requires the person underestimating you to know what you are. And the people who dismiss you quietly, in courtrooms, at dinner tables, in conference rooms with mahogany furniture, they almost never do. They see the license you didn't get. They see the salary that didn't grow the way salaries are supposed to grow. They see the apartment without the second bedroom. They don't see the letter. They don't see the 40 acres. They don't see the 27 years of April phone calls from a man who was keeping something safe until the right person was ready to carry it. Go to the property, open the container, read every page and every bin before you make a single phone call. And if someone who should have seen you clearly decided instead that you were the liability, the backup, the stagnant one, let them hold that conclusion. They made it with incomplete information. You don't owe them the correction. The water has been here for 1,000 years. It will wait. And so it turns out, will you?